The thunder of hooves echoed across the dusty plains as Catherine Owens raced toward freedom, her heart pounding as fiercely as her horse's hooves against the hard, packed earth. Behind her, the shouts of angry men grew fainter with each passing moment, but the terror that gripped her remained just as strong. They would catch up eventually, they always did, and when they did, she knew her fate would be sealed forever. The year was 1878, and Silver Creek, Wyoming territory was supposed to be Catherine's fresh start after inheriting her late uncle's modest homestead. She'd left Boston with dreams of independence, something a 23-year-old woman like herself could scarcely find in proper society back east. But she quickly discovered that the frontier held its own set of rules and men who were determined to enforce them. Catherine's horse slowed as they approached a shallow creek, the animal's sides heaving with exertion. She allowed it to drink while scanning the horizon nervously. The pursuers weren't visible yet, but she knew they wouldn't give up easily, not after what she'd done. "Just a little farther, Penny," Catherine whispered to her mare, stroking its sweaty neck. "We'll find somewhere safe." The crime that had set the town against her was simple. She had refused to sell her land to Jeremiah Blackfield, the cattle baron who controlled most of Silver Creek. When intimidation failed, he'd somehow convinced the town council that a woman had no business owning property independently. They declared her mentally unfit to manage her affairs without male guidance, a thinly veiled excuse to force her hand. Catherine had fled when she overheard their plans to have her committed to an asylum back east if she continued to resist. With only what she could carry and her uncle's horse, she'd escaped in the dead of night. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, Catherine's shoulders slumped with exhaustion. Her water canteen was nearly empty, and she had no clear destination. Just as despair threatened to overwhelm her, she spotted a thin plume of smoke rising from behind a stand of cottonwoods in the distance. Approaching cautiously, she found a small ranch nestled against the foothills. A modest cabin with a well-tended corral stood before her, and a man was working with a spirited chestnut horse in the yard. Nathan Lawson didn't look up immediately as Catherine approached. His focus remained on the young stallion he was gentling, speaking in low tones as he slowly circled the animal. At 30 years old, Nathan had the weathered look of a man who'd spent his life outdoors, tanned skin, sun-bleached streaks in his otherwise dark brown hair, and eyes that seemed to constantly scan the horizon. "Hello there," Catherine called out, keeping her voice steady despite her exhaustion. "I wonder if I might trouble you for some water." Nathan turned, his hand still on the horse's halter. His sharp blue eyes took in her disheveled appearance, the quality of her riding clothes now coated in dust, and the obvious signs of hard travel. "Of course, madam," he replied, securing the horse before approaching. "Looks like you've come a fair distance." Catherine nodded, dismounting somewhat stiffly. I'm Catherine Owens." "Nathan Lawson," he replied with a slight tip of his hat. "Water's by the porch." "Help yourself, and your horse too." As Catherine gratefully drank and led Penny to the water trough, Nathan observed her closely. There was something in her manner, the way she constantly glanced back in the direction she'd come from, that told him she wasn't simply passing through. "Trouble following you, Miss Owens?" he asked directly. Catherine hesitated, then nodded. "Men from Silver Creek, they're trying to force me off my land." Nathan's expression darkened. "Blackfield's men, you know of him." "Every rancher within 100 miles knows Jeremiah Blackfield," Nathan replied grimly. "He's been swallowing up small spreads for years." Just as Catherine was about to elaborate, the distant sound of horses caught their attention. Nathan moved swiftly, leading both horses toward the barn. "Get inside," he instructed, pointing to the cabin. "I'll deal with them." Catherine hurried into the cabin while Nathan casually positioned himself by the corral, looking for all the world like a man simply going about his business. Minutes later, 4 riders appeared, their horses lathered from hard riding. "Afternoon, gentlemen," Nathan called out, his voice friendly enough but his stance subtly shifting to keep his right hand free near his holstered Colt. The leader of the group, a man with a red bandana and a sheriff's badge that Catherine knew to be merely for show, pulled his horse to a stop. "Lawson," he acknowledged with a nod. "We're tracking a woman who stole a horse from town. Seen anyone pass through?" Nathan shook his head. "Haven't seen any lone woman riders today. Just old Jenkins and his son heading to market earlier. What's she look like?" "Young, city clothes, riding a sorrel mare," another man supplied. "Probably heading north." "Wish I could help," Nathan replied evenly. "If I see anyone matching that description, I'll be sure to let Sheriff Miller know next time I'm in town." The man with the bandana studied Nathan's face for a long moment before nodding. "See that you do. Woman's not right in the head dangerous to herself. It's for her own good we're bringing her back." "Of course," Nathan agreed, his expression betraying nothing. "Good luck with your search." The riders moved on after a few more questions, and Nathan watched until they disappeared over the ridge before returning to the cabin. Catherine stood by the window, her face pale. "They said I stole my own horse," she whispered, "and that I'm dangerous." "Men like that will say anything to get what they want," Nathan replied, pouring her a cup of coffee from the pot on the stove. "Want to tell me what's really happening?" Over the next hour, Catherine explained her situation, her inheritance, Blackfield's increasingly hostile attempts to buy her land, and finally, the town council's declaration that no respectable woman could manage property alone. "They claim they're concerned for my welfare," she said bitterly, "but they just want my land. There's a creek that runs year-round through my property. Blackfield needs that water for his cattle." Nathan listened attentively, his expression growing more troubled. "It's not uncommon out here. Women have few rights to begin with, and those can be stripped away by men with power and influence." "So there's nothing I can do?" Catherine asked, fighting back tears of frustration. Nathan was silent for a moment, then shook his head. "I didn't say that, but fighting back won't be easy." "I'm not afraid of difficult," Catherine replied firmly. "I just need to know if it's possible." "It might be," Nathan said thoughtfully, "but you'll need help and evidence of their wrongdoing." Catherine stayed at Nathan's ranch that night, sleeping in his small spare room while he took the couch. The next morning, they discussed a plan over breakfast. "First thing we need is proof that the council's claims about you are false," Nathan explained. "And we need to establish that you have legal right to that property." "Do you have the deed?" Catherine nodded. "It's hidden at the homestead. Uncle James left everything properly documented." "Good. Then we need allies, people in town willing to stand against Blackfield. Are there any?" Catherine asked doubtfully. Nathan smiled slightly. "More than you might think. Blackfield has made plenty of enemies over the years. Their plan was risky. They would return to Catherine's property under cover of darkness to retrieve the deed and any other documents that might help their case. Then they would seek out the assistance of Judge Wilson in the neighboring town of Clearwater, a man known for his fairness and dislike of Blackfield's methods. As they prepared to leave that evening, Nathan loaded an extra rifle and handed it to Catherine. "Can you shoot?" "My uncle taught me," she replied, handling the weapon competently. "Though I'm better with a shotgun." Nathan looked impressed. "You're full of surprises, Miss Owens." "Catherine," she corrected him. "I think we're past formalities now." "Catherine," he agreed with a smile that reached his eyes for the first time since she'd met him. "And I'm Nathan." They rode out as dusk was settling over the land, taking a circuitous route to avoid the main trails where Blackfield's men might be watching. As they traveled, Catherine found herself studying Nathan's profile in the fading light. There was something reassuring about his steady presence, a quiet confidence that came from knowing his own mind rather than a need to dominate others. "Why are you helping me?" she asked suddenly. "You barely know me, and you're risking a lot." Nathan was silent for a moment before answering. "My mother lost everything when my father died. The bank took our home because they said a woman couldn't hold the mortgage. She died a year later, working herself to exhaustion as a laundress." His voice was steady but threaded with old pain. I was too young to help her then. I'm not too young now. Catherine's heart ached for the boy he had been. I'm sorry about your mother. It was a long time ago, he replied, but some injustices don't fade with time. They reached Catherine's homestead well after midnight. The small cabin sat dark and undisturbed, suggesting that Blackfield's men weren't watching it continuously. They probably think you won't risk coming back, Nathan whispered as they approached cautiously. Inside, Catherine quickly located the hidden compartment beneath a floorboard where she'd concealed important papers. Along with the deed, she found letters from her uncle describing threats he'd received from Blackfield before his death, evidence that the cattle baron had been pressuring landowners for years. As Catherine gathered these documents, Nathan checked the property. When he returned, his expression was grim. "They've diverted your creek," he reported. "Built a dam upstream to redirect the water onto Blackfield's property." Catherine's face hardened. "That's illegal. Water rights are specifically mentioned in my deed." "More evidence for Judge Wilson," Nathan agreed. "We should leave now before a noise outside cut him off." Nathan immediately doused the lamp and moved to the window. "Two riders," he murmured. "Probably just checking the property, but we need to go." They slipped out through the back door and made their way to where they'd hidden their horses. Just as they were about to mount up, a voice called out, "Who's there? Show yourself." Nathan pushed Catherine behind him. "Ride," he whispered urgently. "I'll hold them off and catch up." "I won't leave you," she protested. "You have to get those documents to safety," he insisted. "Go to the old mining shack I showed you on the map. I'll meet you there." Before she could argue further, a shot rang out, the bullet splintering wood nearby. Nathan drew his revolver and returned fire, providing cover as Catherine reluctantly mounted and galloped away. The ride to the abandoned mining shack was tense, with Catherine constantly looking back for signs of pursuit. She reached the dilapidated structure just before dawn and secured her horse out of sight before taking up position by a window to watch for Nathan's return. Hours passed with no sign of him. Catherine fought against rising panic, imagining the worst. Had he been captured? Killed? Just as she was considering returning to search for him, she spotted a lone rider approaching slowly. Relief flooded through her as she recognized Nathan, but it quickly turned to alarm when she saw him slumped forward in the saddle. She rushed out to help him dismount, gasping when she saw the bloodstains spreading across his left shoulder. "It's not as bad as it looks," he assured her through gritted teeth as she helped him inside. "Bullet went clean through." Catherine set to work immediately, cleaning and bandaging the wound with supplies from Nathan's saddlebags. Her hands remained steady despite her fear. "What happened?" she asked as she worked. "Blackfield's men," Nathan confirmed. "They weren't expecting resistance." "I winged one of them and managed to get away, but not before catching this." He gestured to his shoulder. "They'll be looking for us now." "We need to get you to a doctor," Catherine insisted. Nathan shook his head. "Not safe. We stick to the plan. Reach Judge Wilson in Clearwater." "That's at least a day's ride and you're injured." "I've ridden with worse," he said, attempting a reassuring smile that turned into a grimace. "We'll rest here today, travel tonight." As they waited for nightfall, Catherine tended to Nathan's wound and they talked, learning more about each other's lives. Nathan had been on his own since 16, working cattle drives and eventually saving enough to buy his small ranch. Catherine spoke of her life in Boston, the stifling expectations placed on women of her class, and her uncle's encouraging letters that had offered her a different path. "He believed women should have the same opportunities as men," she explained. "Everyone thought he was eccentric, but he taught me to ride, shoot, and manage accounts, everything I'd need to run the homestead." "He sounds like a wise man," Nathan replied. "The frontier needs more women like you, not fewer." As the day progressed, Nathan developed a slight fever. Catherine bathed his forehead with cool water, worry etched on her face. "We should wait another day before traveling," she suggested. "Can't risk it," Nathan replied, struggling to sit up. "Blackfield's men will be searching every inch of this territory." Despite Catherine's concerns, they set out after dusk. The journey was slow and difficult, with frequent stops when Nathan's strength faltered. By morning, they were still several hours from Clearwater, and Nathan's condition had worsened. They took shelter in a small grove of trees near a stream where Catherine helped Nathan dismount and lie down. "Just need to rest a bit," he murmured, his face alarmingly pale. Catherine dampened her handkerchief in the stream and placed it on his forehead. "Sleep," she urged gently. "I'll keep watch." While Nathan slept fitfully, Catherine studied the map they'd been following. There was a small settlement marked about an hour's ride away, perhaps someone there could help, but leaving Nathan alone in his condition seemed too dangerous. Her dilemma was resolved when she spotted dust on the horizon, riders approaching from the direction of Silver Creek. Catherine quickly woke Nathan. "Someone's coming," she whispered urgently. "Can you ride?" Nathan pushed himself up with visible effort. "Have to," he replied grimly. They mounted as quickly as possible, with Catherine helping Nathan into the saddle. Instead of continuing toward Clearwater, they veered east toward the small settlement, hoping to lose their pursuers in the rough terrain. The settlement turned out to be little more than a trading post run by an elderly couple. The woman, Martha, took one look at Nathan and ushered them inside, while her husband Thomas kept watch. "Bullet wound?" Martha asked briskly, already gathering supplies. Catherine nodded. 2 days ago. "He's been getting weaker." "Infection setting in," Martha confirmed after examining the wound. "I'll do what I can, but he needs proper doctoring." "There are men looking for us," Catherine explained. "Dangerous men." "Thomas saw them passing about an hour ago," Martha replied, mixing herbs into a poultice. "Heading toward Clearwater." This news brought both relief and frustration. They were temporarily safe, but their destination was now being watched. Nathan drifted in and out of consciousness as Martha treated his wound. When he was more lucid, Catherine showed him the map. "Clearwater's not safe now," she said. "But there's a telegraph office in Riverbend, half a day's ride south. We could wire Judge Wilson instead of going in person." "Good thinking," Nathan agreed weakly. "But you should go without me. I'll just slow you down." "Absolutely not," Catherine replied firmly. "We started this together, we'll finish it together." Martha provided them with fresh supplies and directions to Riverbend via little-used hunting trails. They departed the next morning, with Nathan stronger but still far from healed. The journey was slow but uneventful, and they reached Riverbend by late afternoon. The telegraph operator looked skeptical when Catherine requested to send an urgent message to Judge Wilson, but the sight of gold coins quickly changed his attitude. Catherine carefully composed a message explaining their situation and requesting the judge's intervention, including details about the water rights violations and the fraudulent claims against her mental competence. While waiting for a reply, they took rooms at the small hotel, with Catherine registering them as Mr. and Mrs. Lawson to avoid suspicion. In the privacy of her room, she finally allowed herself to acknowledge the growing feelings she had for Nathan. His willingness to risk everything to help her, his quiet strength and unwavering moral compass had awakened emotions she hadn't expected to find in her heart. The reply from Judge Wilson arrived the next morning, terse but encouraging. "Evidence sufficient. Stop remain where you are. Stop arriving tomorrow with federal marshal. Stop." "This could work," Nathan said, hope evident in his voice as they read the telegram together. "Wilson has authority to overrule the local council, especially with evidence of water rights tampering." Catherine nodded, though anxiety still gnawed at her. "But will it be enough to stop Blackfield permanently? He's not a man who gives up easily." "One battle at a time," Nathan advised, his hand briefly covering hers. "First we secure your legal rights, then we worry about Blackfield." That evening, as they shared a quiet meal in Catherine's room to avoid being seen in the hotel dining room, Nathan suddenly asked, "What will you do once this is resolved, assuming we win?" Catherine looked surprised at the question. "Return to my homestead, I suppose." "Make it work the way my uncle intended." "Alone." The words seemed to hang between them, laden with meaning. That was always the plan, Catherine replied carefully, watching his face. Independence was what I came west for. Nathan nodded slowly. It's a hard life, ranching alone. Even harder for a woman, not because you lack ability, he added quickly, but because of men like Blackfield who will never accept a woman's right to determine her own path. Are you suggesting I should give up? Catherine asked, a hint of defensiveness in her tone. Never, Nathan replied earnestly. I'm suggesting that independence doesn't have to mean solitude, that perhaps partnerships can be formed without sacrificing freedom. Catherine's heart quickened at his words and the intensity in his eyes. What kind of partnership do you have in mind, Mr. Lawson? Before he could answer, a commotion erupted in the street below. They rushed to the window to see several riders dismounting in front of the Hotel Blackfield's men, led by the man himself. They found us, Catherine whispered, fear gripping her heart. Nathan moved quickly, checking his revolver. They must have intercepted the telegram somehow. We need to leave now. They gathered their belongings swiftly, but just as they were preparing to slip out through the back stairs, heavy footsteps sounded in the hallway outside their door. Catherine Owens, Blackfield's voice boomed. We know you're in there. Come out peacefully and no one needs to get hurt. Nathan positioned himself between Catherine and the door, his voice low but firm. When I create a distraction, run for the stables. Get the horses and be ready to ride. What are you going to do? Catherine asked anxiously. Buy you time, he replied. Go out the window onto the balcony and down the side stairs. I'll meet you at the stables. Nathan, no, trust me, he said, his eyes locked with hers. Then, in a moment that burned itself into her memory, he leaned forward and kissed her swiftly but tenderly. I'll find you, now go. Heart pounding, Catherine climbed out the window as Nathan threw open the door to confront Blackfield and his men. She's not here, she heard him declare boldly as she made her way down the stairs. And she's not going anywhere with you, Blackfield. This doesn't concern you, Lawson, came Blackfield's dismissive reply. The woman's unstable, and the council's appointed me her legal guardian, based on false claims and forged documents, Nathan countered. Judge Wilson's already been notified of your water rights violations. Federal marshals are on their way. Catherine didn't hear Blackfield's response as she reached the ground and darted toward the stables. She quickly saddled both horses, hands trembling but determined. Gunshots suddenly echoed from the hotel, sending her heart into her throat. Moments later, running footsteps approached and she raised the rifle defensively. Nathan appeared in the doorway, breathing hard but apparently uninjured. Time to go, he said urgently. I've bought us a few minutes, but not much. They galloped out of town just as shouts and more gunfire erupted behind them. Instead of taking the main road, Nathan led them across the open prairie toward a line of hills in the distance. Where are we going? Catherine called as they rode. There's an old trapper's cabin in those hills, Nathan shouted back. We can hold up there until the judge arrives. They rode hard for nearly an hour before reaching the hills, where Nathan guided them through a narrow pass to a well-hidden cabin nestled against the rocks. It was small and crude but defensible, with a good view of the approach. We should be safe here, Nathan said as they unsaddled the horses and concealed them in a natural corral formed by the rocks. Blackfield knows these hills are Apache territory. He won't risk bringing too many men this far. Apache territory, Catherine repeated nervously. The local band has an understanding with a few of us ranchers, Nathan explained. We respect their boundaries, they leave us be. I've traded with their chief before. As night fell, they took turns keeping watch. During her shift, Catherine found herself studying Nathan as he slept. His features softened in repose despite the lines of pain still evident around his eyes. The wound in his shoulder had reopened during their escape, and she'd redressed it as best she could. What would happen after all this was resolved, she wondered. Would they simply go their separate ways? The thought brought an unexpected ache to her chest. Dawn broke with no sign of pursuit, but neither of them relaxed their vigilance. They were just discussing whether to risk sending a message to Judge Wilson when the sound of approaching horses reached them. Nathan positioned himself by the window, rifle ready. "Stay back," he warned Catherine. "If things go badly, there's a path behind the cabin that leads deeper into the hills." But it wasn't Blackfield who appeared in the clearing below. Instead, a distinguished older man in a black coat was accompanied by two younger men wearing federal marshal badges. "Judge Wilson," Nathan breathed in relief, lowering his rifle. "And it looks like he kept his word about bringing help." They met the judge and marshals outside the cabin where formal introductions were quickly made. "Miss Owens," Judge Wilson said, tipping his hat respectfully. "Your telegram was most concerning. I've reviewed the documents you sent ahead, and I must say the evidence of malfeasance is quite compelling." "Then you believe me?" Catherine asked hopefully. "I do indeed," the judge confirmed. "Water rights tampering is a federal offense, and the council's actions regarding your competency appear highly questionable. Blackfield has overplayed his hand this time." One of the marshals stepped forward. "We've already secured the telegraph office in Riverbend and arrested two of Blackfield's men for interfering with federal communications. Blackfield himself has retreated to Silver Creek." "Then what happens now?" Nathan asked. "Now we return to Silver Creek and set matters straight," Judge Wilson replied firmly, "with federal authority." The journey back to Silver Creek took most of the day. As they approached the town, Catherine felt a mixture of dread and determination. So much had happened since she'd fled in the night, yet it had been less than a week. The town seemed unnaturally quiet as their group rode down the main street. People watched from windows and doorways, but few were brave enough to be seen openly on the boardwalks. They headed directly to the town hall, where the council was hastily assembled. Blackfield was present, his usual confident demeanor somewhat diminished by the presence of the federal marshals. Judge Wilson wasted no time. "Gentlemen, I have reviewed the evidence regarding your actions toward Miss Catherine Owens. I find them not only morally reprehensible but legally indefensible." "Now see here," protested Mayor Harkins, a man firmly in Blackfield's pocket. "We acted out of concern for the young lady's welfare." "Did that concern extend to falsifying documents about her mental state?" the judge asked sharply. "Or to illegally diverting water from her legally deeded property?" Blackfield stepped forward, attempting to regain control. "Your Honor, there's clearly been a misunderstanding. Miss Owens is a young woman alone, inexperienced in the ways of the West. Our actions were merely protective. That's enough," Nathan interrupted, his voice cutting through Blackfield's smooth explanation. "You tried to strip her of her rights for your own gain. That's not protection, it's theft." Blackfield's eyes narrowed dangerously. "Stay out of this, Lawson. This doesn't concern you." "It concerns anyone who believes in justice," Nathan replied evenly. "You've bullied and cheated folks in this territory for too long, Blackfield." The cattle baron's hand drifted toward his gun. Big words from a small rancher. One of the marshals moved subtly to intercept any potential violence. "I wouldn't, Mr. Blackfield. Threatening violence in front of federal officers would be unwise." Judge Wilson cleared his throat. "Here's what's going to happen. The council's declaration regarding Miss Owens is hereby nullified. Her property and rights are to be fully restored, and the water diversion will be dismantled immediately." He fixed Blackfield with a stern gaze. "Furthermore, there will be a full investigation into water rights violations throughout the territory. I suspect Miss Owens isn't the only victim." The council members looked at each other uneasily. Mayor Harkins was the first to break ranks. "We were only following Mr. Blackfield's recommendations," he said hastily. "He assured us it was all legal." Blackfield's face darkened with fury at this betrayal. "You spineless, that's quite enough," Judge Wilson interrupted. "Mr. Blackfield, you would be wise to cooperate with the investigation. The alternative could involve federal charges." For a tense moment, it seemed Blackfield might resist. Then, with a cold smile, he inclined his head slightly. As you wish, Your Honor, but this isn't over. His gaze shifted to Catherine and Nathan, not by a long shot. Actually, Mr. Blackfield, one of the marshals said, I believe it is. He produced a document from his coat. This is a warrant for your arrest on charges of mail fraud, based on evidence provided by several of your former business associates. You've been manipulating land prices and threatening sellers for years. Those practices end today. The look of shock on Blackfield's face as he was taken into custody was something Catherine knew she would remember for the rest of her life. In the days that followed, Catherine was formally restored to her property. The water diversion was dismantled, and several council members resigned in disgrace. Without Blackfield's influence, the town began to change, with new voices including women's being heard at town meetings. On a warm evening a week after their return, Catherine sat on the porch of her cabin, watching the sunset. The sound of approaching hoofbeats made her smile even before she saw the rider. Nathan dismounted and climbed the steps to join her, his injured shoulder healing well but still carried carefully. Everything all right? He asked, taking the seat beside her. Better than all right, she replied. Judge Wilson came by earlier. Blackfield's being sent east for trial and his ranch will likely be divided and sold off. Good news indeed, Nathan agreed. Though he still has friends, you should remain cautious. I always am, Catherine assured him, but I won't live in fear either. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment before Nathan spoke again. I've been thinking about what comes next. Catherine turned to look at him. For the town, for us, he clarified, meeting her gaze steadily. We never finished that conversation in Riverbend. Catherine's heart quickened. About partnerships, Nathan nodded, suddenly looking less certain of himself than she'd ever seen him. Catherine, I know you came west seeking independence and I would never want to take that from you, but these past days have shown me something I wasn't expecting to find. What's that? She asked softly. That sometimes standing together makes both people stronger, not weaker. He took her hand gently. I'm not asking you to give up your dream, I'm asking if there might be room in it for me as well. Catherine felt tears spring to her eyes, but they were tears of happiness. I think, she said carefully, that independence means having the freedom to choose one's own path, and I choose a path with you if you'll have me. Nathan's smile was like the sunrise. I was hoping you'd say that. Their kiss was tender at first, then deepening with the promise of all that lay ahead, challenges certainly, but faced together. 1 year later, Catherine and Nathan stood on the porch of a new, larger cabin built on land that combined both their properties. Their wedding 3 months earlier had been attended by half the territory, including Judge Wilson, who had performed the ceremony. Mrs. Lawson, Nathan said, wrapping his arms around his wife from behind as they watched their expanded herd grazing in the distance. Any regrets? Catherine leaned back against his chest. Not a single one. Though I do insist you continue calling me Catherine when we're voting on ranch decisions. Nathan laughed. Wouldn't dream of doing otherwise. Your business sense is sharper than mine anyway. The Lawson Ranch was becoming known throughout the territory, not just for its fine horses and cattle, but for its progressive practices. Catherine had established a school on their property where girls were taught the same skills as boys, including ranching and business management. Several neighboring ranchers had begun sending their daughters to learn. I received another letter from that women's suffrage group in Cheyenne, Catherine mentioned. They've invited me to speak at their next gathering. You should go, Nathan encouraged. Your story needs to be heard. Catherine turned in his arms to face him. Our story, she corrected. I couldn't have done any of this without you. You would have found a way, Nathan said with conviction, but I'm grateful every day that you didn't have to do it alone. As the sun set over their land, painting the sky in brilliant golds and reds, Catherine reflected on the journey that had brought them here. From a desperate flight to freedom to building a new kind of life together, one based on mutual respect and shared dreams rather than ownership or control. It wasn't the independence she had originally imagined, but something far better. a partnership of equals, forging a path that would hopefully make the frontier a little more just for the women who would follow. And it had all begun because one man had been willing to stand up and say, "Not while I'm alive and standing here."